Hi, welcome to episode 57 of Roxy's Journal of Stitchery. Today what I'm going to do is I'm going to add my feature elements to my background, so my hand-dyed background. So you saw last week that I wanted to layer up and get lots of textures of different fabrics and textiles in 4 blocks where I would form my word, which was love, and the O for the love is going to be my heart. That's where my heart's going to come into play. So I'm just starting off with my some little bits and pieces just to add some interesting bits, and I cover a lot of my background, but I don't want to fully cover it up. So what I'm doing on this little piece here is I'm just doing a straight running stitch or cantha stitch, and I'm doing my stitch lines in pairs. So you'll see in a minute, not in the middle, in a minute, it's like tram tracks. So this week I've actually edited my videos like I've done in the past, even though I've been doing some live chitty chat videos, which my sister Rachel says she likes. Tonight I haven't done that because I have filmed whilst I was watching rugby league sport here in Australia, for those who aren't Australian. And tonight was the State of Origin, which is our big game of the year, where my state, New South Wales, versus Queensland, which is the state that our older brother lives in. It's a really big thing. Pretty much everyone watches the State of Origin. It's a 3-match series, and unfortunately my team lost by 1 try tonight. So next week they get to have another opportunity to win the second game, and if they win the second game, they'll go to the decider, which is the 3rd game. So enough of me talking about rugby league. So I just showed you my little tram tracks that I've stitched down. That's an old piece of quilt there, which has some discolouring, which I really like. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add on my 4 layered blocks. So you saw me play around with these last week, and I did have an E cut out in a bright green, but you just saw a little flash of a new E there, which is in a creamy and pink floral fabric, which I liked a lot better because it kind of went along with my colours, which I'm doing this week. I felt like the green sort of stood out too much. It didn't really match the block. So just playing around with them, and then I'm going to pin them in place. And my plan is just to do a cantha running stitch on each of the blocks to hold all the layers of fabric in place and to give them sort of that nice look. I love it when you sort of cantha stitch and it gets that lovely look. And the type of thread that I'm using is just a white sewing machine cotton. It's the vintage one that I use quite regularly. So I'm just giving you a little taste of the running stitch that I'm doing. I'm just doing small stitches, a little bit apart, maybe, I don't know, 3 mils apart, and just running them down in vertical lines. On some of the blocks I will go horizontally, and some I will go vertically, just to make it look interesting with some different looks. All right, so I think you get the idea of what I'm doing. I'm up to, I think I've stitched 2 down, the 2 top ones are down, and now I'm just going to stitch the bottom ones in place. So I start off by stitching along the side here because I've got a little piece of blue and white trim that's poking out from underneath that tea-dyed fabric, and I want to stitch that down in place first so it doesn't go all over the place and look funny. So again, just a simple running stitch, and I will continue doing the vertical cantha style stitching on this block here. A lot of the fabrics that are underneath, I leave them unstitched. They're actually held down because they overlap underneath. And I leave them unstitched because I do fray up the fabric a little bit. You can see on the top there with the bright pink one, I've actually frayed up the edges of that fabric, the pink one and also the tea-dyed fabric underneath. So my 4 blocks are all stitched down in place. You can see there that they've got acantha style stitching on them. And now I'm playing around with some other elements that I'm going to add to my block. So I'm thinking of putting some Suffolk puffs down the bottom. I do really like that aqua one with maybe a pink one. I look at the purple and then I think I decide the pink one might look better. And then maybe that little flower there, which has come off some lace. But I don't actually sew those ones down this week. I'm going to leave that for next week. What I do sew down is this little pale pink, sort of a dusty pink, little floral lacy bit. I don't know what else you'd call it. It's a bit of a lacy bit. So I stitch this down again. I'm just using my white sewing machine cotton. I pull it quite tight into the pink part and you can't see it too well, which is good. It kind of blends in. And all I'm doing is I'm just stitching over the edges of the lace, and I do that all over the place just to hold it in place. And this little motif thing has 2 flowers, and I do end up adding a 3rd flower in as well. But before I do that, I stitch down my letter E because then I slightly overlap my E with the flower, which you'll see in a minute. The first piece of lace is stitched in place. Now I'm going to stitch my E down. Now I have cut this with a raw edge, and yes, I probably will get a little bit of fraying, but it won't be so much that it will bother me too much, and I don't mind a bit of fraying anyway. So what I'm doing, same machine, sewing cotton just in a white, I'm just doing the cantha running stitch, and I stitch all over the E just to hold it down nicely, and sometimes I just go slightly over the edge. Once I've done that, I'm then going to stitch down my 3rd flower, which is going to overlap with the E. So here is my third flower. As you know, if you've watched my videos before, I do like to group things in odd numbers. So three I think looked better than two. And I'm just again stitching it down all over the place to make it look like it's just part of that lace. Okay, with my pink lace in place, now I decide to stitch down the other letters. So this V was cut out of a hand-dyed felted wool, and I want to add a bit more texture underneath, so I decide to get a bit of my tea-dyed cheesecloth. I think it's called cheesecloth. And I just add it down underneath, and then I get a pink sewing machine thread, just an old one, and I do an overcast stitch around the V, and because you pull it quite tight and the wool's quite thick and fluffy, the stitches pull down quite nicely into the V and you can't see them too much, which is a good look. So just a straight overcast stitch is what I use to stitch down the V. All right, so V is stitched down in place, and now it's time to stitch down the L. So just again a plain sewing machine cotton, and this time it's a lavender purpley kind of color which blends in nicely with my wool. It's a little bit lighter than the wool, but it doesn't matter. You can't see it too much as I stitch because again the thread, I pull it tightly and it pulls down into that fluffy wool. And the final thing that I'm going to show you tonight is my heart, my ove in my word love. So I'm just sketching out a rough heart shape with a friction pen, get the right name, just in the aqua blue friction pen. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some different kind of materials and things like that to stitch down the shape of my heart. So the first little thing I've got here is a pale pink piece of sari silk which has been dyed, and I've cut a little strip, and what I do with that is I just hold it in place and I cantha stitch it down, and the thread that I'm using, I'm pretty sure it's a Steph Francis, I think it's a Steph Francis um, silk, so it's a variegated pinky purple silk, and I'm just doing couching straight over the top with the silk. So you can see there that my sari silk piece is in place, and now what I want to use is a bit of the blue ticking, and I'm using plain white sewing machine cotton. I've folded the piece of ticking in half. It's very roughly cut, and I'm just going to stitch the piece of ticking around the base of the love heart shape. Alright, so the ticking is now in place, and just to finish off that top little bit, I want to use some of these hand-dyed, tea-dyed flowers. I start off thinking I might want 4, but then I realise the top of the heart is a little bit higher than the other side, so I just go with 3 flowers. And I will stitch them down with the white sewing machine cotton. So hopefully you can see my little love heart. It blends in a little bit, the creamy colour with the creamy background, but I'm going to lift it up and show you what everything looks like. I'm liking the textures that I'm getting already. I forgot to mention I also sewed that little bit of tea-dyed lace at the bottom as well. And then next week my plan is to embellish my block even a little bit further. So I'm thinking I'll probably finish this block next week, and that'll be good because my last week I will spend on the construction of my pages and putting them into my book. So I hope you've enjoyed this week's video, and I'll see you again next week. Thanks for watching. Bye.